It was barely 6:30 a.m. when the sharp ring of my phone yanked me out of my restless sleep. I squinted at the screen to see an unfamiliar number flashing. With a deep sigh, I picked up, and the gruff voice on the other end introduced itself as Officer Daniels from the local police department. My heart sank as he explained the reason for his call: a break-in at my bar, the Iron Lantern. I sat upright, running a hand through my messy hair. "How bad is it?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "You'd better come down and see for yourself," he replied. "We've got a patrol car there, securing the scene." I hung up, threw on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, and stumbled into the kitchen to grab my keys. But of course, the universe wasn't done with me yet. My truck, my trusty old companion, greeted me with a flat tire as soon as I stepped outside. Just great. With no other choice, I went back inside and grabbed the keys to Rachel's car. She was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos unraveling this morning. By the time I made it to the Iron Lantern, the scene was worse than I had imagined. The front door had been smashed in, shards of glass glinting in the early morning sunlight. Inside, the bar was a mess. Bottles of liquor had been stolen, cash from the register was gone, and furniture was overturned. Officer Daniels stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, as another officer took photos. "Looks like a professional job," Daniels said, gesturing to the damage. "They knew what they were after." I nodded, my jaw tight. This place wasn't just a business to me. It was my life, my pride, and my connection to the community. Seeing it in this state felt like a personal attack. The police assured me they'd do their best to find the culprits, but I knew better than to hold my breath. After the insurance adjuster came and went, I boarded up the front door and started making a list of repairs. It looked like we'd be closed for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Around lunchtime, I decided to head home. As I was about to get into Rachel's car, a voice called out behind me. "Candace, wait." I turned to see a man jogging toward me. He stopped short when he realized I wasn't the person he was looking for. "Oh, sorry," he mumbled, his face flushing. "Thought you were someone else." I nodded, dismissing him, but his face lingered in my memory. There was something about the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he didn't, that set me on edge. When I got home, Rachel was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as I walked in. "Took my car, huh?" she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Flat tire on the truck," I explained, dropping my keys on the counter. "The bar was broken into last night." Her expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling into something resembling concern. "That's awful. Is it bad?" "Pretty bad. We'll be closed for a couple of weeks, at least." She nodded, but her focus had already drifted back to her phone. I made myself a quick sandwich and headed to the garage to work on the truck's tire. Fixing something, even as simple as a valve, felt better than sitting around stewing over the morning's events. By late afternoon, the tire was repaired, and I decided to swing by the store for a few essentials. I picked up some new jeans, a couple of t-shirts, and a ball cap. Nothing fancy, just enough to replace some worn-out staples. When I got back home, there was a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone shopping. Be back later." I stared at it for a moment, feeling a strange knot form in my stomach. Something about the day, about Rachel's detached attitude, about that man at the bar calling out to someone. It all felt off, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just tired, running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Still, as I sat on the couch that evening, staring at the boarded-up front door in my mind's eye, I couldn't shake the feeling that the break-in was only the beginning of my problems. The next few days passed in a blur of repairs, phone calls, and restless nights. Between coordinating with contractors and sorting through insurance paperwork, I barely had a moment to catch my breath. Rachel kept herself busy too, though with what, I couldn't quite tell. Her shopping trips were becoming more frequent, and when I asked about them, she'd just wave it off with a casual, "Needed a few things." I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was off, and the memory of that man at the bar calling out the name Candace lingered in my mind. But every time I tried to piece it together, the exhaustion of the day caught up with me, and I'd let it slide. It wasn't until Friday night that things started to click. With the bar still closed, I had the rare opportunity to take a night off. Rachel was out, supposedly at a late meeting with some clients from her office. I didn't question it. After all, I had my own reasons for needing some time alone. I decided to visit a few local bars in town, partly to scout the competition and partly to clear my head. I cleaned myself up, threw on the new jeans and cap I'd bought earlier in the week, and headed out. My first stop was a quiet pub on the north side of town. The atmosphere was relaxed, the staff friendly, but I couldn't help but feel out of place. It wasn't the kind of crowd I wanted to blend into, so I moved on quickly. By the third bar, I started to notice a pattern. College kids filled the venues, their energy high, their conversations loud and carefree. It made me feel older than I cared to admit. At the fourth stop, a place called the Silver Anchor, I finally settled at the bar and ordered a whiskey on the rocks. I hadn't been sitting there long when a familiar voice caught my ear. "Victor, you promised." A woman's tone, sharp and irritated, floated from the far corner of the room. I turned slightly, careful not to make it obvious I was listening. There she was, Rachel. My heart sank as I watched her lean in close to a man I immediately recognized. It was the same guy who had mistaken me for Candace earlier that week. He had his arm draped over the back of the booth, his body language far too familiar for my liking. For a moment, I froze. Then instinct kicked in. Pulling my cap lower over my face, I shifted my seat to get a better view without drawing attention. The two of them were deep in conversation, their faces close, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Whatever doubts I had earlier were gone. This wasn't a business meeting. It wasn't even close. I finished my drink and slipped out unnoticed, my mind racing. Back in the parking lot, I leaned against Rachel's car, trying to process what I'd just seen. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable. That's when Jessica Monroe came into the picture. She was a regular at the bar, though I'd only spoken to her a few times before. That night, she happened to be sitting at a nearby table with a group of friends. As I was leaving, she caught up with me in the parking lot. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice light but her expression concerned. I hesitated, unsure if I could trust her, but there was something about her tone, steady, sincere, that made me open up. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to hint at what was going on. Jessica tilted her head, considering me for a moment. "If you need help, I'm good at finding things out," she said with a small, mischievous smile. I didn't know what to make of her offer, but I took her number anyway. "Thanks," I muttered. "I might take you up on that." That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel and Victor together, laughing, leaning into each other as if I didn't exist. By morning, I had made up my mind. I would take Jessica up on her offer. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about my bar, my life, my dignity. The next day, I met Jessica at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. She came prepared, a notebook in hand and a determined glint in her eye. "Tell me everything," she said, and for the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't facing this alone. As I recounted the events of the past week, Jessica started taking notes, asking pointed questions that made me realize just how much I had overlooked. By the time we finished, she had a plan. "I'll start with Victor," she said. "If he's as shady as he seems, it won't take long to find something on him." "What about Rachel?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. Jessica hesitated for a moment. "We'll get to her," she said carefully, "one step at a time." I nodded, knowing she was right. For now, it was enough to have a direction, a way forward. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that uncovering the truth would be far more complicated and painful than I had anticipated. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. Between Jessica's digging and my own attempts to keep up appearances, I found myself walking a fine line between normalcy and the storm brewing beneath it. Each new piece of information Jessica uncovered was like another brick in the wall, solidifying what I already suspected but didn't want to believe. By midweek, Jessica had traced Victor's activities back several years. As it turned out, he wasn't just some sleazy boss with a penchant for affairs. He had a track record of manipulating people, particularly women, to cover up his questionable financial dealings. He was smart, careful, and ruthless, qualities that made him dangerous. One of Jessica's biggest breakthroughs came when she managed to obtain a copy of an internal report from Victor's company. The document, which had somehow been leaked online, hinted at irregularities in their accounts. Large sums of money were being funneled into untraceable expenses, and Victor's name popped up more than once in the notes. "It's not enough to nail him, but it's a start," Jessica said when we met at the same coffee shop. "He's definitely up to something, and Rachel, well, she might be deeper in this than you think." I didn't want to believe that. No matter how strained our marriage had become, I couldn't wrap my head around Rachel being involved in something illegal. Cheating? Maybe. But this? It didn't seem like her. While Jessica worked her angles, I turned to someone I hadn't yet confided in, George Blackwood, Rachel's father. George was an old-school, no-nonsense kind of guy, a man who believed in honor, loyalty, and hard work. He and I had always gotten along, mostly because I shared those values. But this was different. If I was going to bring him into this, I needed to tread carefully. I called him on a quiet Thursday evening and asked if he could meet me at the bar. He agreed, though his tone was skeptical. By the time he arrived, I had the place to myself, save for a contractor working on the new security system. "What's this about, Kevin?" George asked as he stepped inside, his brow furrowed. I gestured for him to sit at one of the freshly polished tables. "It's about Rachel," I said, my voice steady but low. "And Victor." That got his attention. George's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. "What about them?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I've got reason to believe she's involved with him, more than just professionally." For a moment, George didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his jaw tightening. "You'd better have proof," he finally said. "I'm working on it," I replied. "But there's more. Victor isn't just seeing her. He's using her. There's something shady going on at his company, and I think she's caught up in it." George sat back, his expression unreadable. "Does she know?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But if she does, she's keeping it from me. And from you." He let out a slow breath, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. "All right," he said finally. "Tell me everything." I laid it all out for him. Everything Jessica had uncovered, everything I'd seen, everything I suspected. By the time I finished, George looked like he was ready to explode. "That bastard," he muttered under his breath. "And Rachel, my own daughter." "I didn't want to come to you with this," I said, "but I didn't know where else to turn. If she won't listen to me, maybe she'll listen to you." George nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the table. "Leave it with me," he said. "I'll get to the bottom of this." True to his word, George didn't waste any time. The next day, he called Amanda, Rachel's younger sister, and filled her in on what was happening. Amanda, who had always been close to Rachel, was shocked but not entirely surprised. "She's been distant lately," Amanda admitted when George pressed her for details. "I thought it was just stress from work, but now I'm not so sure." Together, George and Amanda started piecing together their own timeline. Amanda recalled overhearing Rachel talking on the phone late at night, her tone hushed and secretive. She also mentioned a few shopping trips that didn't add up. Rachel buying expensive items she never wore, disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. Meanwhile, Jessica uncovered another critical piece of the puzzle: security footage from the Silver Anchor. The grainy video showed Rachel and Victor entering the bar together, sitting close, their body language leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. When Jessica showed me the footage, my stomach turned. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it with my own eyes. I forwarded the video to George, who immediately called Amanda to arrange a meeting with Rachel. That Sunday, George and Amanda confronted Rachel at her parents' house. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it later from Amanda. Rachel denied everything at first, but when George showed her the video, she broke down. "It's not what it looks like," she insisted, but the evidence was damning. George demanded to know the truth, but Rachel refused to explain herself, storming out of the house instead. Later that evening, George called me. "You were right," he said, his voice heavy. "She's involved with him, and she's hiding something. What do we do now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We keep digging," George replied. "If she's in trouble, we need to know. And if she's not, well, She's got some explaining to do. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. The truth was coming to light, piece by piece. But I also knew this was far from over. If Rachel and Victor thought they could keep their secrets buried, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. By Monday morning, I was completely drained, both physically and emotionally. Rachel hadn't come home since the argument at her parents' house, and I wasn't sure if I wanted her to. Half of me hoped she'd walk through the door, ready to explain everything, while the other half dreaded what that explanation might be. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. Now, I was just tired. Jessica called mid-morning, and there was a softness in her tone I hadn't heard before. "Hey, Kevin. I know it's been a rough week, but I've got something. You up for it?" "Go ahead," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I knew I needed to hear it. "Victor's got his hands in some pretty dirty business," she said. "Money laundering, shell companies, the works." I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. "And Rachel? She's involved." "At least on paper," Jessica admitted, her voice cautious. "It's not clear how much she knows. Maybe she's just signing things without asking questions, or maybe she's fully aware. I can't tell yet." Hearing her name tied to something so serious hit harder than I expected. Rachel wasn't perfect, none of us were. But this wasn't her. Or at least, it wasn't the version of her I thought I knew. "Kevin," Jessica said gently, pulling me back to the moment. "You okay?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "What's the plan?" She hesitated. "Victor's got a pattern. He meets certain people at this private club downtown. If he's doing anything shady, it's probably happening there. But we'll need someone on the inside." It didn't take long for us to land on Amanda as the perfect choice. Rachel's younger sister was still furious about everything, and when Jessica explained the situation, Amanda didn't even hesitate. "If Victor's screwing over my sister, and you, I want to help," Amanda said when we called her. "Tell me what to do." That night, I sat in my truck a block away from the club, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Jessica was nearby, parked just outside the alley, while Amanda had gone inside. She texted earlier to let us know she'd spotted Victor in the VIP section, surrounded by a couple of suits who looked like they belonged more in a boardroom than a bar. "Kevin," Jessica's voice crackled through the phone, pulling me from my thoughts. "Victor's leaving. He's heading toward the alley." I didn't wait. My heart pounded as I got out of the truck and made my way toward the alley, the cool night air doing little to calm my nerves. By the time I got there, Victor was deep in conversation with a tall man in a tailored suit. Amanda had slipped out of the club and was standing with Jessica at the far end of the alley, both of them watching intently. "Keep it quiet," Victor was saying, his voice low but firm. "Carter's getting too close. Handle it." I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the chest. My name. He was talking about me. "Kevin, don't," Jessica whispered through the phone, but it was too late. My anger took over, and I stepped out of the shadows. "Well, if it isn't Carter," Victor drawled, his face twisting into a smug grin. "Didn't think you had it in you to show up?" I felt my fists clench at my sides, my entire body trembling. "You're done, Victor," I said, my voice steady despite the fire burning in my chest. "The lies, the money, dragging Rachel into this. It ends now." Victor chuckled, a cold, empty sound. "And what exactly are you going to do about it?" Before I could answer, Jessica and Amanda stepped forward, their phones raised and recording. Victor's grin faltered for the first time. "You think this is going to stop me?" he sneered, but there was an edge to his voice now, a crack in his confidence. "No," Jessica said calmly, "but it's a start." Victor glanced between us, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to fight, but the man beside him placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Not here," the man said quietly. "Not now." Victor shot me one last glare before turning and walking away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet alley. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in shallow gasps, before Jessica placed a hand on my arm. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Amanda looked shaken, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We keep going, I said, until we know everything. Later that night, when I finally made it home, I found a note waiting for me on the kitchen counter. We need to talk. It was in Rachel's handwriting, simple, familiar, and yet it felt like a stranger had written it. I stared at it for a long time, my mind spinning. Whatever she had to say, it wasn't going to change what I'd seen or heard. But as much as I wanted to harden myself against her, a part of me, small but stubborn, wanted to believe there was still something left worth saving. I folded the note, tucked it into my pocket, and sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of the day finally settling on my shoulders. I didn't know what the next step would be, but one thing was clear. The truth was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to call Rachel. Her note sat folded on the kitchen counter, mocking me with its simplicity. We need to talk. But did we? What more was there to say? Between her lies and Victor's threats, I didn't even know where to begin. I decided to focus on what I could control. Jessica and Amanda were already busy, combing through more of Victor's connections. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to my bar. After weeks of chaos, it was starting to feel like solid ground again. Repairs were nearly finished, and the reopening was scheduled for Saturday night. It gave me a sense of purpose, a distraction from the storm raging in my personal life. By mid-afternoon, Jessica called with an update. Kevin, I've got something big, she said, her voice steady but urgent. Victor's company is under investigation. Federal level. I don't know how long it's been going on, but if they find what we think they will, he's finished. Does Rachel know? I asked. I doubt it. If she did, she'd have bailed by now, Jessica said. But here's the thing. We found out he's been using a hotel suite downtown for his private meetings. Amanda's brother-in-law works security there. He's agreed to let us see the logs. My stomach tightened. What kind of meetings? The kind that involve Rachel, Jessica said quietly. She's been there. A lot. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. I felt like someone had punched the air out of me. Do you have proof? We will soon, she said. The security cameras should tell us everything. I didn't want to wait. That evening, Amanda and I met her brother-in-law at the hotel. He led us to a back office where we reviewed the security footage. My hands trembled as I watched Rachel walking into the suite with Victor, her smile bright and easy, as though nothing in the world was wrong. The timestamp showed it was 2 nights ago, the night after our fight. She lied, I said, my voice cracking. She lied to all of us. Amanda placed a hand on my shoulder. Kevin, I'm so sorry. I stared at the screen. The image of Rachel burned into my mind. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease with which she'd done it. The same woman who'd promised to build a life with me, who'd stood by my side through thick and thin, had become a stranger. I need to confront her, I said finally. But not yet. I need her to see what she's done. Saturday night arrived, and so did the reopening of the Iron Lantern. I had thrown everything I had into making it a success. New menus, live music, even a few renovations to freshen up the place. It was packed by 8 p.m., the atmosphere electric with laughter and music. But I wasn't there to celebrate. I was waiting for Rachel. I'd invited her earlier that day, under the guise of wanting to talk. She had agreed, her tone cautious but curious. When she arrived, I was waiting for her in a private booth near the back. She was dressed to impress, her hair perfect, her smile practiced. Kevin, she said as she slid into the booth. Thank you for inviting me. I've been meaning to. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Save it, Rachel. I want you to watch something. I pulled out my laptop and hit play. The security footage from the hotel suite filled the screen. Rachel's smile faltered, her face draining of color. Kevin, I can explain. Explain what? I snapped, my voice rising. Explain how you've been sneaking around with Victor while I've been here, trying to keep our lives from falling apart? Explain how you've lied to your family, to me, to yourself. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not this time. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. It started as a mistake? I interrupted. Don't insult me, Rachel. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Over and over again, You chose him." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, the only sound was the muffled music from the bar. I waited, giving her a chance to speak, but she said nothing. "You've been caught, Rachel," I said finally, my voice cold. "I have the footage, the bank records, everything. And if you think for 1 second I'm going to let you or Victor drag me down with you, you're dead wrong." She looked up at me, her mascara smudged, her expression pleading. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to face the consequences," I said. "I'm filing for divorce. You're going to explain yourself to your family, and you're going to stay out of my life." Her face crumpled, but I didn't waver. I stood, sliding the laptop into my bag. "Enjoy the party, Rachel. It's the last one you'll have at my expense." That night, I drove to Jessica's place to update her. She was sitting on her porch, a glass of wine in her hand, when I arrived. "How'd it go?" she asked. "It's done," I said, sinking into the chair beside her. "She knows it's over." Jessica nodded, her expression unreadable. "And how do you feel?" I stared out at the dark street, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Relieved, maybe. Sad. Angry. It's all mixed up." She gave me a small smile, her voice gentle. "You did the right thing, Kevin. You stood up for yourself. That's not easy." For the first time in weeks, I let out a long breath, feeling a sliver of peace creeping in. It wasn't over, not yet, but it was a start. The morning after the confrontation with Rachel felt strangely quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. The storm wasn't over, but at least I wasn't caught in the middle of it anymore. I had made my move, and now the pieces were falling into place. By noon, Amanda called to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm okay," I replied honestly. "Tired, but okay. How's the family taking it?" Amanda sighed. "Mom's devastated, and Dad's, well, you know Dad. He's trying to act like he's fine, but you can tell he's furious. Rachel's staying with them for now, but they're not exactly making her feel welcome." "I don't blame them," I said. "This isn't just about me. She lied to all of us." "Yeah," Amanda agreed softly, "but it's still hard to see her like this." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for Rachel, to remember the good times, the woman I'd married. But every time I tried, the image of her walking into that hotel suite with Victor came rushing back, and the sympathy vanished. Later that day, Jessica came by the bar to finalize some details for our next steps. The reopening had been a massive success, and the buzz around town was already drawing in new customers. Despite everything, the Iron Lantern was thriving. Jessica leaned against the bar, her notebook open in front of her. "So, what's next?" she asked. I glanced around the room, the familiar warmth of the place giving me a sense of calm. "I keep moving forward," I said simply. "The bar, the renovations, that's where my focus is now." She nodded, but there was something else in her expression, something cautious. "And Rachel?" "I filed the papers this morning," I said. "She'll get served later this week." Jessica hesitated, then reached out and placed a hand on my arm. "I know this isn't easy for you, Kevin. No matter what she did, it's still a loss. Take the time you need to process it." Her words stayed with me long after she left. She was right, of course. It was a loss. But it wasn't just about losing Rachel. It was about losing the life I thought we had. The trust, the partnership. Letting go of all of that wasn't going to happen overnight. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The renovations at the bar were completed ahead of schedule, and the new menu was a hit with customers. Amanda stayed in touch, providing updates on her parents and Rachel. Apparently, Victor had gone underground after news of the federal investigation spread. No one had seen him in days. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Amanda. "Kevin, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice tinged with both disbelief and relief. "Victor's been arrested." I froze. "What? How?" "Turns out, one of his own people turned him in," she explained. "The feds have enough evidence to bury him. Money laundering, fraud, you name it." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. Good. He deserves everything that's coming to him. And Rachel? I asked cautiously. She's claiming she didn't know anything, Amanda said. But with everything that's come out, she's going to have a hard time convincing anyone. Dad's already told her she needs to come clean, but who knows if she'll listen. I thanked Amanda for the update and hung up, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Victor's downfall was satisfying, but it didn't erase what had happened. It didn't undo the damage. A few days later, Rachel showed up at the bar. It was late afternoon, and the place was quiet, the lunch rush long over. She looked tired, her usually polished appearance slightly unkempt. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. "Kevin," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Rachel?" She hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I let out a humorless laugh. "Sorry? For what, exactly? For lying? For cheating? For dragging me into Victor's mess?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel anything. No anger, no pity, nothing. "I made a mistake," she said. "I let things get out of control, and I didn't know how to fix it." "You didn't even try," I said coldly. "You had every chance to come clean, to talk to me, to make things right. But instead, you doubled down." She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I regret everything." I stared at her for a long moment, searching for any trace of the woman I'd once loved. But all I saw was someone I no longer recognized. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but it doesn't change anything. We're done, Rachel. It's over." She nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the bar, the door closing softly behind her. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding, not just for the bar, but for me. Amanda and her parents remained supportive, and Jessica became a steady presence in my life, offering both friendship and encouragement. I poured everything I had into the business, and it paid off. The Iron Lantern became more than just a bar. It became a place of community, a fresh start. As for Rachel, she moved out of town shortly after the divorce was finalized. We didn't keep in touch, and I was okay with that. Whatever her future held, it wasn't my concern anymore. One evening, as I stood behind the bar, watching the crowd laugh and mingle, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, and the weight of what had happened. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that was enough.